Welcome on in, WIP Daily. Joe Giglio with you. Appreciate everyone listening, subscribing, of course, following the podcast and watching on our 94 WIP YouTube channel. Tucker Bagel will join me in a few minutes. Leave a rating, leave a review, and leave a question wherever you leave your comment, whether it be YouTube or it be any of your podcast platforms. And we'll take those to do a mailbag episode soon here on the show. So today's got to be about Bryce Harper. I mean, yesterday, as usual, dramatic fashion. Bryce does what he's done. He has a flair for the dramatic. He reminds me in a lot of ways of Reggie Jackson. And it's number 300, Bryce Harper. And a couple of things hit me yesterday. I mean, obviously, the player Bryce Harper has been evident for a very long time, since he was 16 years old on the cover of Sports Illustrated and the big leagues at 19 and really having a remarkable career. So yesterday, he got to 300 home runs. So only 28 hitters have ever gotten there quicker. And really, if not for injuries, the pandemic season, Bryce would have been there quicker. I mean, I think when he first came up, if you were to guess, you would have probably said he would have gotten there at age 29, maybe instead of age 30. But age 30 is still pretty quick to get to 300 home runs. And after the game yesterday, he's talking about wanting to, he has bigger goals in mind and maybe even being with the Phillies beyond the next 8 years, which is what he has left on this contract he signed, the 13-year deal back before the 2019 season. So I really started thinking about Bryce Harper and how these milestones are going to go. And there's one caveat. Let's get it out of the way now. It's a big one with him because of what's happened the last few years. It's health. His consistency as a performer has really not changed. In fact, he's getting better. I mean, he has a higher OPS as a Philly and a slugging percentage as a Philly than he did with the Nationals. I mean, he's really rounded into his prime here in Philadelphia. The question with Bryce is always going to be, as he gets older, how much we project how much he's actually going to play. Now, he tries to post every day, but there's been issues. I mean, he had Tommy John surgery. He's had back flare-ups that have caused him to be in and out of the lineup, or at least not be able to play the field. What's his position? Is he going to try to play the outfield again? Try to throw the baseball again? Is he a long-term first baseman? How much time will be a DH as the year goes on? I don't know. I don't know. So I think anytime you do a projection like this, when you start thinking about a player in his 30s, it'd be foolish to just say, well, he's going to play 162 every year or 160 each year. And whatever his 162 game average, he's going to just add that per year, because the reality is he's not going to play every single day and his body's going to probably deteriorate as he gets into his mid to late 30s. But there's also a level with this player of remarkable consistency. So let's start with home runs. Then we'll get to some other numbers I think we could see Bryce Harper chase in a Phillies uniform. So yesterday was home run number 300. He's slugging .538 as a Philly, which portends to a lot of home runs as time goes on. You take that pandemic season, which he lost a lot of games. Everyone did, but his home run total would be even higher. So he's a guy that, on average, per every 162, hits 33 home runs. Now, we just discussed it. He's not going to play 162 games a year, but that gives us a pretty good baseline. If he averages 25 home runs per season over the next 8 years, let's just use the life of his contract with the Phillies, that's 500. I would be surprised, barring an injury that takes him off the field for a season or something close to that, like a knee or something, like Bryce Hoskins. I'd be surprised if Bryce Harper does not get to 500 home runs. Now, when he first came up and I first watched his swing and his power, I thought 600 were in play. And maybe it still will be. Maybe he stays healthier than you kind of project. Maybe he signs another contract. Maybe he goes for, we'll see. When I first watched him, I thought 600 was in play. I still think 500 is going to happen because, one, it seems like this stuff matters to him. As good for him. Like, he's a great player and he's checking off milestones in his career. And the other thing that's you could see it yesterday, there's a love affair between him and the city. And I think this city will feed off of watching him chase numbers. I think there's going to be a real interest. And maybe the Phillies smartly realized this before he even got here, that he's the type of player that people will gravitate towards and love and follow. And, the Phillies right now are in a championship window. This team looks like they are poised to make, noise in October again. And we'll see how long that continues. But I could foresee a scenario toward the end of his Phillies career. Let's say the competitive window, the championship window, maybe it's closed for the Phillies. Maybe they're not as good 6 years from now. That people still go to the ballpark to watch Bryce Harper chase numbers because he's Bryce Harper. And this doesn't happen very often in this city. I mean, it doesn't happen very often where you get to watch a player in a uniform for a long time, chase numbers in that uniform for a long time. Obviously, the last time something like this was Mike Schmidt. So I think 500 is going to happen. I think it will happen in a Phillies uniform. I think he can average 25 home runs per year over the next 8 years. That feels really doable. And, 25, kind of that baseline is not a big number. And then you start thinking about it, like all he needs is 1 or 2 big years in there to lift if he has a couple down years. If those numbers in his age 36 season is only 24 or 20 or 21. Like if he has a couple 37s left in him, 39s left in him, which I think he does, then he's going to get there. So I think he's going to chase and get to 500 home runs. Could he get to more? Maybe. I mean, he's got to stay healthy and or sign another contract, which he did hint at yesterday that he wants to do it. So 500 home runs, I believe, is very doable. And I would bet on Bryce Harper to get to 500 home runs. Now, hits is interesting. So Bryce Harper has 1,493 hits in his career. So he's about halfway to 3,000. This is going to be harder for him because he walks so much. I always think hitters that walk a lot have trouble getting to 3,000 hits. You go to now it's not everyone, right? There's some 3,000 hit guys that walked a lot, but you look at the guys that had the most walks. The guys that average 80, 100 walks a year, they don't get typically to 3,000 hits because it's just plate appearances that are off the board. And then if you start missing some time, you lose games. Bryce Harper's only had 150 or more hits in a season twice. That's not big. I mean, that's not a high number. I mean, the 3,000 hit guys usually are in that 180, 190, 200 and above range on a pretty consistent basis because you just need to stack up years and years and years of hits. So he has averaged more than a hit per game, over his career, but he didn't play enough games to get over that 150 hits per season. The way I view this one is if you kind of use the number of 140, I came up with 140, 25 home runs, 140 hits. If you do 140 hits a year for the next 8 years on average, he'd be about at 2,600 hits when his Phillies contract is over. Now, that may be enough for him if he still feels healthy to chase that. And that might be actually more attainable than maybe 600 home runs. Maybe he's hanging out in that 510 home run range, 8 years from now. But he's got 2,611 hits, and he thinks, 3 more years, if I can stay healthy and someone will let me play, maybe the Phillies, I could chase 3,000 hits. So I think that is possible. But with his injury history, the fact that he walks so much, I think it's unlikely. I view Bryce Harper as more in the 2,700 hit range when his career is over, with over 500 home runs. Now, the next two, I think these are interesting. We have one here on the screen, and then one that I think is even more of kind of a rare club. And I'm not sure which one matters more to Bryce. We'll see. And they can kind of do both at the same time because they're similar. But runs batted in, he has 872. And 2,000 is a big round number for runs batted in. Not many guys have ever gotten there. And the same thing with runs. I'll get to that in a second. But Bryce Harper with RBIs, when he was younger, it felt less attainable because he would hit the top of the order sometimes. But he's settled in now to he's a third or fourth hitter with the Phillies, even though there's been opportunities here over the last X number of years where they could have put him at the top of the lineup. I mean, they really haven't had perfect leadoff hitters. Whether it be Andrew McCutchen, and McCutchen got hurt, and they tried a whole bunch of different players out there, and then obviously Schwarber the last couple of years. But they could have put Bryce at the top of the order in any of these years. He gets on base enough, he sees enough pitches. They've chosen not to. It feels like he's wanted to ascend to that run-producing position. And with that, he's going to rack up more runs batted in. I don't think he's going to get to 2,000. 1,500 feels like a really attainable number. Could he get it to the 1,800 range? Yeah, he probably can. But that's one that is also dependent on people around you and depending on playing time. I think people would have imagined he has more runs batted in than he does. That number almost feels low. It's like, man, only 872 for all the years. But here's the one that caught me when I was looking at it yesterday. He has now scored 979 runs in the major leagues. There's a good chance, decent chance, he gets to 1,000 runs scored before the end of the season. So he could end his age 30 season with 300 home runs. Obviously, he's already there. With 1,500 hits, he'll get there with 7 more hits. That'll be next week. And he could, 21 more runs the rest of the way. A big number, but with the way the Phillies are hitting, it's certainly doable. He could end this season with 1,000 runs scored. The number of players in baseball history that have scored 1,000 runs, and I'm sure Bryce Harper knows this because he knows his baseball history and he knows how rare this group is. It is Alex Rodriguez, Willie Mays, Pete Rose, Babe Ruth, Henry Aaron, Ty Cobb, Barry Bonds, and Rickey Henderson. That's it. It is a very select group of players that get to 2,000 runs scored. And I think Bryce Harper could get there. Now, this is a combination of his own power. He hits his own way in, right, with the home run. So if we're just throwing at least 200 more home runs on top, that's at least 200 more runs he does all by himself. And then his walks and his on-base percentage get him on base. And I'd imagine the Phillies are going to consistently put players around him that could knock him in, whether developing players like an Alec Boehm, who hits well runners in score position behind him, or, buying the next Nick Castellanos. Whenever Castellanos deal, runs out in a few years, they'll go get another, 4-5 hitter outfielder that could knock some runs in and knock him in when he's on base. So that one feels like something I could see him chasing, those kind of round numbers. And it almost works with everything else because if he's hitting home runs, he's scoring anyway. So I think he's getting to 500 home runs in a Phillies uniform. I don't project 3,000 hits. I don't think he'll get to 2,000 runs batted in. It's a very big number. But the runs scored is the one that hit me. I think he could become, 6th, only the 9th guy to ever score 2,000 runs. And there might be a couple playing right now that maybe will be there with him. Maybe Mookie Betts has a chance. Or maybe Freddie Freeman. I got to look at their numbers. But, yeah, whoever. Maybe someone else currently. But I think he'll be one of 10 or so to ever get to 2,000 runs along with the 500 runs. Tucker, number 300 for Bryce Harper yesterday, and I feel like it was almost like a glimpse of the future as we watch him and, very proudly and with the crowd here, like just bask in chasing these numbers.
Yeah, it certainly won't be the last milestone. I think Bryce Harper celebrates as a Philadelphia Philly, and I think that's kind of why he's here. Like, he talks about how much he loves being a part of this franchise, and I think more so he enjoys kind of breaking and setting those marks at home in front of a crowd who's so excited and so far behind him. And it's kind of funny. I was thinking about this last week. This is his 5th year as a Philly, which is pretty crazy because it feels like just yesterday he signed here. But through 5 years, he's only got 2 30 home run seasons. He only has 1 year with 100 RBIs. The Phillies only have, 2 winning seasons. He has yet to play in an all-star game. Like, if you had told somebody in 2019 when he signed the contract through 5 years, they're going to have 0 all-stars, 2 30 home run seasons, and 100 RBI season, they'd say, oh my God, that's terrible. And I think right now, if you polled anybody, I think you'd be really hard-pressed to find anyone who would say, yeah, you know what? I wish we didn't sign him to the contract. Like, the fact that he's been able to be huge in so many big moments has kind of overshadowed the fact that a lot of his counting stats really aren't there. And it's not necessarily his fault that, 2020 happened the way it was and he missed, a big chunk of last year due to injury and the beginning of this year. But I think that's going to be the biggest issue for him. And it's unfortunate because I think there's a sort of generation of superstars, including Bryce Harper. You can throw Mike Trout in there, Mookie Betts, you mentioned, who kind of had like a year of their prime just sort of shaved off because of the pandemic. And I think there's going to be a situation where maybe, a decade from now, Bryce Harper might be at, 475 home runs. And he's going to be hanging on trying to get those last 25 that he probably could have gotten had things just worked out a little differently and they played a full season back in 2020. And I think, like you, the biggest issue for him moving forward is just him staying healthy. Because when he's on the field, he's as productive as he's ever been, save for maybe his first MVP season, where he was just, on another planet for that, entire year. But he's still dealing with back problems on like a day-to-day basis. He hasn't really found a way to play first base every day without being injured. I wonder, as we sit here and look at his future and project, this is what he's going to look like when he's 40. I don't know. Is he still playing then? Like, I just wonder with how violent his swing is and how hard he plays on a day-to-day basis. I don't know if he can necessarily hold up that long. And him playing at 38, 39, 40 might not look exactly how we think it will.
To that last point you made, Tucker, and it never looks the way you think it will. I mean, you've seen so many baseball players limp to the end. I mean, look at Miguel Cabrera now, Joey Votto now, Eddie Murray towards the end of his career. This happens all the time. So Is it going to be pretty? Is it going to be a steady 25, 25, 25 for the next 8 years? Nah, probably not. And who knows? Maybe it turns out he signs an extra contract with the Phillies just to get over those humps. It's funny to end with this. And that pandemic took away 100 games roughly from every great player. I just pulled up Mookie Betts' numbers because of the same. This is both their age 30 season. It's remarkable how similar they are, even though you don't think of them as similar players. Mookie and Bryce are about 30 hits from each other, and runs scored, it's nearly identical. So they may chase 3,000 hits together, though Mookie's probably a better bet to get there with his batting average. And they probably chase 2,000 runs scored together at the same age. We'll see who stays healthier and all that kind of stuff. But as far as home runs, it's not the first. I guess it is the first milestone home run, but it's the first of many. 400. I think he'll get to 500 and some other big ones along the way. And this crowd will be behind him the whole time. It is fun. Bryce Harper milestones are a big part of his career now moving forward. It will be for a while. Appreciate everyone watching, subscribing, listening to WIP Daily. We'll talk soon.